Week 11 is officially here, and today I got you guys covered with my top 36 wide receivers in the tier list format I bring you guys every week, going through my wide receiver 1s, my wide receiver 2s, my wide receiver 3s, and my favorite flex plays entering week 11 of fantasy football. It is crunch time. We are ready to win some games. We are ready to clinch our playoff spots. But with that being said, before I get into the official top 36, I go through the will they play tier, and there's only one name on the will they play tier, and it just so happens to be Amari Cooper of the Buffalo Bills. Reports are saying that he does say he thinks he will play in this game, but he has been limited in practice, is a true questionable entering the weekend, and of course he has missed these last couple of weeks. If he does suit up, he's a top 36 level play in my rankings, but for the time being, until he shows what his true role is in this offense, I do prefer Shakir straight up. So if he does play, he's going to be a little bit behind Shakir in my rankings, but I still think he's a clear-cut top 40 wide receiver. But now let's move on to my wide receiver ones, my top 12 overall wide receivers, and we start off with my wide receiver 1 overall on the slate with Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals, and he hasn't placed number one list on this list this year. You know, it's been CeeDee Lamb, it's been Tyreek Hill, it's been Justin Jefferson, but it's time I give Jamar Chase his flowers. Sure, is it a tougher matchup on paper going up against a very good Chargers defense on Sunday Night Football? Absolutely. On the other hand, the Bengals are still implied for nearly 23 points. And as we've seen from Jamar Chase, he has been the clear-cut cream of the crop so far at wide receiver. In terms of fantasy points per game, just him and Nico Collins are averaging over 20 points per game this year, with Jamar Chase at 22.5. We know he has the biggest high ceiling potential in fantasy football. We've seen that in the two matchup against Baltimore this year, 55.4 PPR points, 41.3 PPR points. Until somebody shows me a weak winning level ceiling like Jamar Chase has this year, I should be ranking this guy number 1 overall. He has been the clear advantage at wide receiver, and it's time that I treat him that way. Welcome back, Nico Collins. He ranks in as my number 2 wide receiver on the week, 24.5 implied Texans points this week. On the road, Monday Night Football, going up against my beloved Dallas Cowboys. I officially had to make the jersey switch. I had to put Dak Prescott on the mend right there. Obviously, he's going to be out for the rest of the season with his hamstring tear. Incoming, Nico Collins, baby. And I mean, with Nico Collins, we saw what he was able to do before his injury. He was legitimately a stud alpha number 1 wide receiver on what was a very high performing Texans offense. Since Nico Collins has gotten hurt, the Texans offense has not been playing similar ball. We know that he was 100% ready to go last week. They decided to hold him out of that last game. He is back this week. Again, no limitations in practice. He himself said he will be fully ready to go, and I expect a monster performance. The Cowboys defense is overmatched. Trayvon Diggs has not been playing his best ball coming off that ACL tear. DaRon Bland has still not made his debut this season, and I think this sets up a monster bounce back performance for this Texans offense, starting with number 12 at that X wide receiver position. And then wide receivers 3 and 12 respectively actually played on Thursday Night Football. Big divisional matchup, Washington taking on the Eagles. Obviously, the Eagles came away with a W in that game. A.J. Brown ranked as my wide receiver 3. Not the biggest game for him overall. A.J. Brown, 8 targets, 5 receptions, 65 receiving yards, and 11.5 PPR points. However, if you started Terry McLaurin, you're probably even more disappointed because we do see only 2 targets, 1 reception, 10 receiving yards, 2 PPR points from Terry McLaurin in this matchup. It's really a surprise for Terry McLaurin, especially. Again, A.J. Brown, obviously this is your downside case for him. 8 targets, not quite getting there on the stat sheet. That's going to happen for these guys. For Terry McLaurin, though, 2 targets after what we've seen basically since week 3 of the NFL season has been the true shock. Washington's offense wasn't clicking like it usually does. I do expect that to get figured out when they're not going up against the buzzsaw. That is that Eagles defense at this current point. Number 4 wide receiver for me is Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings, 22.75 implied Vikings points on the road against Tennessee this week. And it was a very weird week for JJ this past week. Smash matchup going up against Jacksonville, but unfortunately he did not put up the numbers we could have expected. Only 5 receptions, only 48 receiving yards in that past game. But given the usage, I expect Justin Jefferson to fully bounce back this week. 32% yearly target share, 18.6 PPR points per game. And while he hasn't been quite the same as, Nico Collins and Jamar Chase have been on a per game basis, we know that Justin Jefferson from a talent perspective is up there with all the wide receivers, and I do think this Vikings offense will bounce back. Again, he hasn't quite had that 30 plus, 35 plus point performance as we know Justin Jefferson has in his bag. Sooner rather than later, we will get that blow up performance, and maybe it does come against a pass funnel Titans defense. Wide receiver 5 for me, and speaking of the aforementioned Jacksonville Jaguars defense, we have Detroit hosting Jacksonville this week, and Amon-Ra St. Brown ranks in as my wide receiver 5. over 30 implied points for this Lions offense. Vegas expects Detroit to get going early and often in this game. Like I mentioned, the Jaguars defense overall is overmatched in this matchup. We do see that the number one matchup against opposing wide receivers happens to be this Jags defense. We also see that they're not very good at stopping anything. I mean, they rank literally the worst against the opposing wide receivers. They rank bottom 4 in terms of overall run game. And I think that could be the issue with Amon St. Brown. Some people may want to rank him, number 1, number 2, number 3 on the week. The reason why I rank him at number 5 is that this Detroit passing offense simply has not operated at the same volume it had last year. We saw last year, for example, 35.9 pass attempts per game. This year, they've been handling teams very easily. They've been getting that run game going. We've only seen 27.7 Jared Goff attempts per game. So it really depends on the context of this matchup. I, for one, don't think the Jags will be able to put up much of a fight in this game. Hence the 14 implied point favorites that Detroit is in this game. So if the Lions get up early, maybe, Montgomery and Gibbs get going, I'm a little bit concerned about the overall passing volume in this game. However, Amon St. Brown, in terms of consistency, is one of the most consistent wide receivers in the NFL. 18 plus PPR points in 6 of his 9 games played this year. So although I don't really think he's a strong contender to be the wide receiver 1 overall in the slate, I do think he's a very strong mid wide receiver 1 projection. And then wide receivers 6 and 7 respectively are the Rams duo over there, coming in with Puka Nacua at 6 and Cooper Kupp at 7, going up against the New England Patriots on the road this week. 24 implied Rams points in this game. Puka and Cooper Kupp are very hard to distinguish on a week-to-week basis because it almost feels like they peddle good performances. On one week, one of them is going to be a mid-wide receiver 1, the other one's going to be a high-end wide receiver 2. On the other week, that is completely flipped. That is what we get from this Rams offensive environment, though. We know that this offense is insulated because of McVay, because of Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford has actually been throwing the ball a lot more as of late. And as we know, when these two wide receivers are healthy, they are the cogs, they are the engines of this Rams offense. When the Rams offense is clicking, it goes through Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. Again, pick one out of a hat, which one you want to rank higher, but I think both should be profiling as mid to back end wide receiver 1s on a week in, week out basis. It is tough. We do see Christian Gonzalez on the other side, but if there is one offense I trust in terms of utilizing their wide receivers to avoid a shadow corner, it will be McVay in this Rams offense. Number 8 wide receiver for me is Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. They are hosting the Indianapolis Colts this week and implied for nearly 24 points in this game. He finally stepped back down to earth with a pedestrian stat line, but 20.4 PPR points per game since week 5 and a clear connection with A-Rod makes him a wide receiver 1 for me. It's very similar to the Rams wide receivers when it comes to the Jets. We know this is a consolidated target hierarchy. We know both Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams will be peppered with the football, but I do trust Garrett Wilson based on the sample size we have seen with both of them on the field. Next up at 9, we have Tyreek Hill, wide receiver, of course, of the Miami Dolphins. Over 25 implied Dolphins points hosting the Vegas Raiders this week. And I get it. There's a lot of volatility here. There's a lot of concern. Obviously, Tyreek Hill as a whole in the year has not been that same Tyreek Hill we've expected in the past. We know, for example, the guy that was on MVP ballots last year, he still has that level of upside, I would say, especially once Tua gets fully acclimated back into the offense. This will be his 4th game after returning from the concussion. And with Tyreek Hill, to put it simply, again, I understand the wrist is a concern, but it does sound like this is a type of injury he can play through according to the docs that I've seen. And with Tyreek Hill, again, wide receiver 9, it could either be way too low or way too high after the week. If he connects for a big, long touchdown, looks like Tyreek Hill, people are going to forget about that wrist injury. If he struggles yet again, people will be calling for my neck on why I had him at wide receiver 9. Wide receiver 10 for me is Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers, over 27 implied Niners points between them and the Seattle Seahawks this week. For Deebo Samuel, the only real concern that I have for him this week is that this is a very crowded room of weapons in this 49ers offense. We know Kittle's there, we know CMC's there, but I do think with how well both Ricky Pearsall and Jawan Jennings have played, especially on an offense that does want to run the football inherently, I'm concerned about Deebo's overall ceiling. However, of course, the offensive insulation, the spike week potential he represents, I think he should be ranked in the top 12 this week, especially knowing that the Niners are implied for so many points. However, I would not be shocked if Ricky Pearsall had a great game, or Jawan Jennings had a great game, or the aforementioned CMC and Kittle have great games, leaving a little bit behind for Deebo Samuel. Again, that is a risk you got to play. I mean, we were drafting both him and Ayuk in the preseason, knowing inherently this would be a crowded offense because we want to reap the benefits of Kyle Shanahan, and we want to reap the benefits benefits of this 49ers installation. So although he's a little bit more volatile than some of the other names in this list, we know he'll carry the football. We'll know he'll catch passes out of the backfield. We know he'll be utilized as the Swiss Army knife in this offense, which yields a ton of fantasy upside weekly. And then finally, closing out my wide receiver ones and a debutant in my wide receiver one tier, but we have George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers going to host the Baltimore Ravens this week, 22.75 implied Steelers points. And I've talked about Pickens' peripherals all year about how dominant he is in terms of air yard share, how dominant he is in terms of target share, but we're finally starting to see the production come to light, and his elite metrics are being marked with top-end production in these last few weeks. Even if you ignore the context that he should have had another touchdown against the Giants on Monday Night Football, he has been exceptional in these last 3 games. Now goes up against a Ravens secondary that was just absolutely obliterated by Jamar Chase. They are awful against the pass. We expect this to be a high-scoring game environment, and I think this is George Pickens' single best spot of the entire year. But you need to start these guys in this range, so now let's focus some more on the wide receivers 13 to 36. But if you guys want to get access to all of our weekly rankings moving forward to help you guys secure that fantasy football championship, there is one of 2 ways to access the best fantasy resource in the entirety of the 2024 cycle. First way is by going over to Underdog Fantasy using promo code FSE. Sign up and first deposit at least $10. You will get access to our full rankings manifesto moving forward. The other way is by going over to flockfantasy.com. Promo code FSE, you will get 30% off any site-wide package as well as a 7-day free trial over on Flock. Ton of value in that weekly rankings manifesto. Can't understate just how valuable that resource is moving forward. The #1 resource for winning your fantasy football championship. But now we move on to my wide receiver 2s, and we start off with Davante Adams, the other New York Jet wide receiver. Like I mentioned with Garrett Wilson, Davante Adams has been extremely involved in terms of his target share since coming to the Jets. We do see in the 4 games he's played, he's commanded a 31% target share, and while he hasn't been playing the best football overall, we did see an evident ceiling back in week 9, 22.1 PPR points, the wide receiver 7 on that week. Number 14 is Jayden Reed of the Green Bay Packers, 23 implied Packers points this week on the road against their division rival Bears. And with Jayden Reed, again, I understand he hasn't been as good as he was earlier in the season as of late, but he's still been solid these past couple of weeks, and I do think Green Bay is the type of offense that can scale up as the season progresses. The Chicago defense is good. However, I do think Reed is a playmaker, both operating at that 3rd level of the field, operating around the line of scrimmage with the yak opportunity. He is the true dynamic force of this Green Bay offense, an offense, like I said, that I expect to continually get better. So I understand it is a tough matchup. It isn't the biggest of smash spots we'll see for Green Bay this year, but I still love Jayden Reed to be that dynamic factor in this game. Next up, and a guy you can even argue being higher on this list, we have DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks, 20.5 implied Seahawks points this week. I already mentioned the flip side of the matchup with Deebo Samuel. I love DK Metcalf this week. The only thing stopping me from ranking him as a wide receiver 1 is some level of concern, multi-week absence, coming off that knee injury. I'm not concerned about the knee itself. I'm more so concerned about the lack of reps we've seen for DK Metcalf. So that's why he ranks here at 15. However, any way you slice it, we love DK Metcalf's projection moving forward. He was unlocked in this Ryan Grubb system, and he was pacing for his best season since 2020 prior to that knee injury. 23% target share on the year, 42% air yard share, and I trust the knee and DK Metcalf to remind everybody who he is. Niners have been a tough matchup against opposing wide receivers, but like I said, I trust the talent, I trust the offensive scheme, and I trust DK Metcalf to get back on track. Number 16 is Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons, 21 implied Falcons points going on the road against Denver this week, and he's been a monster all year. I mean, he's been a legit wide receiver 1 in fantasy. But him ranking 16 for me is more so to give credit, to give respect to how good Pat Surtain has been on the other side. And despite London averaging 15.9 PPR points per game and a 27% seasonal target share, I do have to downgrade him because Pat Surtain has been that guy. He's wiped out some of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and although I do believe in Drake London, I do have to limit him because I think the ceiling is capped with Pat Surtain on the outside, expected to shadow him all game. And then closing off the high-end wide receiver 2s, we have CeeDee Lamb of my beloved Dallas Cowboys, 17.5 implied Cowboys points at home against Houston on Monday Night Football. And this is really where I landed with CeeDee Lamb because on one hand, you can argue, okay, he's an elite alpha. He's arguably one of the top 3 overall wide receivers in the NFL. He should be ranked higher than number 18. On the other hand, the Cowboys without Dak Prescott did not look like a very good football team. 34-6 loss against Philadelphia this past week. Only 66 passing yards from Cooper Rush and Trey Lance combined. it was a tough watch. I'm not going to lie. I didn't end up actually watching the full game because it was that boring. That's how anemic this Cowboys passing offenses look. And despite CeeDee Lamb being a complete alpha in that game, if the offensive game environment is really going to be capped because of how bad Cooper Rush and Trey Lance operate the quarterback position, I am concerned for CeeDee Lamb. Again, I have him here because it could take the Neighbors development route where because he's so talented, because he's so involved, he will still pay off in fantasy. However, with what we saw last week, I would argue Daniel Jones would be a big upgrade over any of the Cowboys quarterbacks. But moving on to the low-end wide receiver 2s, we have Calvin Ridley of the Tennessee Titans hosting the Minnesota Vikings this week. Only 16.75 implied Titans points this week, which is why I've kind of held back with having Calvin Ridley ranked aggressively. But, I mean, he's proven me wrong. In these last 3 weeks, he has been absolute money, over a 30% target share in each of those games, and he has a 49% yearly share of the seasonal air yards. I mean, he is their deep threat. He is their alpha volume earner. He is their clear-cut number one wide receiver. So, although Will Levis is a concern, although the overall offensive environment is a concern for Tennessee, Calvin Ridley has been playing a lot better football, and he is simply too involved to have lower on this list. And in fact, if you are able to buy him low after week 7, I do think he is a clear-cut top 30 projection moving forward. So, want to give my flowers to Calvin Ridley. Pass funnel matchup going up against Minnesota this week, and I expect him to continue the level of play we've seen. And speaking of continuing the level of play we've seen, if Jauan Jennings continues the level of play we've seen in games he's played over 80% of the snaps, we are looking at a wide receiver 1 in fantasy because in the 2 games over 80% of the snaps, he's commanded 12 and 11 targets respectively, and he scored 46.5 and 16.3 PPR points. And I get that split is not sustainable. I'm not saying that 2-game sample size is indicative of the player Jauan Jennings will be moving forward because we have also seen him in the NFL in the past. It's not like he's a rookie on the scene. However, with Jauan Jennings, I trust with the roll bump he's seen, with the volume he's seen in this offense, for him to be a wide receiver 2 in my rankings. And in fact, if he continues what he's been doing, he could even be a riser on this list moving forward. 21 is Cedric Tillman. And I mean, it's funny that these 3 come in a row, Ridley, Jauan Jennings, and Tillman in a row, because they have all been guys who have been on absolute fire as of late. With Cedric Tillman, in the 3 games since they traded Amari Cooper, he has established himself as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. In that stretch, 21.5 PPR points, 24% target share. He's flashed high-end talent in that X wide receiver role and gets an advantageous matchup against New Orleans this week. Cleveland is implied for nearly 23 points. Vegas loves the Browns offense this week. And after trading Marshawn Lattimore, I don't think they have a chance to stop Tillman on the outside. And in fact, if Tillman has another game where he goes out there, commands nearly 30% of the targets, scores over 18 PPR points, you could argue him as being a clear-cut, top 18, top 15 guy rest of the season. Next up at 22 was Devontae Smith, who did play on Thursday Night Football. Devontae Smith in that game, 6 targets, 4 receptions, 29 receiving yards, only 6.9 PPR points. Disappointing game for Devontae Smith. However, he will bounce back moving forward. This Eagles passing offense has looked fine. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are clearly the best wide receiver 1-2 punch in the NFL right now. And Devontae Smith, like I said, before going into this game, was a very consistent piece on a week-to-week basis. So I'm not concerned about Devontae Smith. He will be a weekly wide receiver 2 for me. Wide receiver 23, and maybe the only challenger to the best 1-2 punch at wide receiver right now is T. Higgins and Jamar Chase on the other side. With T. Higgins, again, we have this conversation with him every year. When he's on the field, he looks dynamic. He looks like a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. When he's not on the field, everybody hates him. Everybody calls him a traffic cone. Everybody calls him useless. Everybody really just hates T. Higgins. And that's the sentiment we always see in the offseason about how we hype up T. Higgins because of his splits, but we also have to hype him down because we know he's inherently going to miss 4 or 5 games. Good news for us, he's already missed his 4 or 5 games this year, and in the games that he's been healthy in, has been an absolute dominant force in fantasy. Over a 30% target share in 4 straight games prior to his quad injury. And we're seeing him score fantasy points at an extremely efficient clip. We know Jamar Chase is going to need it on the other side. We know this is a relatively tough matchup, but I think T. Higgins, anytime he's healthy, is a must-start wide receiver in fantasy football. And then finally at 24, we have DeAndre Hopkins of the Kansas City Chiefs, 22 implied Chiefs points on the road against Buffalo. And it's really as simple as trusting this KC slot role that we have seen. Until someone can shut it down, there's a reason why I will be ranking these guys aggressively. With DeAndre Hopkins, he has established himself as the wide receiver 1 in this offense, number 2 overall target, since he came over via trade from Tennessee. Again, I understand he is a bit volatile volatile at times, but I'm still trusting KC. I'm still trusting Patrick Mahomes, and I'm still trusting DeAndre Hopkins, like I said, given the role he's operating in this offense. But moving on to my wide receiver threes, we start off with Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos, and based off recent play, you can argue this is way too low. However, potential shadow matchup against AJ Terrell. Falcons defense has been playing some decent ball. I do expect it to be a more tightly contested game on the outside for him. However, in his last 3 games, we're talking about an absolute stud. In those 3 games, 30+% target share in each of them, top 12 overall wide receiver in each of those games. And with Courtland Sutton on the year, he has a 25% target share, and he has been playing his best ball of his career. This Broncos offense has been clicking, and I trust this offense moving forward. 23 implied points despite the tougher matchup does indicate that Vegas trusts this Broncos offense. So with Courtland Sutton, I understand he's not the sexiest name. He's not, the upstart rookie that everybody wants to rank high, but he has been damn efficient and he has been damn consistent as of late. And until he shows any type of fall off, there is no reason for me not to trust Sutton in my lineup. And speaking of, young, fresh rookie on the scene, we have Ladd McConkey coming in as my wide receiver 26, nearly 25 implied Chargers points in this game. And the reason why Ladd McConkey ranks up here is that a 23% seasonal target share and nearly 25 implied Chargers points make him very appealing for this matchup. The Chargers' overall passing volume is a concern in this game, but with Cincy posing a strong threat on the other side to score points, I think the Chargers will be forced to throw the football in this game. He's looked good, and if this game happens where Justin Herbert has to throw the ball, if we can get Ladd McConkey to 8 to 10 targets this week, I think he establishes himself as a wide receiver 2 on the slate. But coming in next at wide receiver 27, I am donning the jersey of his teammate Nico Collins, but we have Tank Dell of the Houston Texans. I already talked about the game environment, very, very smash game environment going up against Dallas this week. On one hand, you can argue, well, Tank Dell's going to lose targets because the alpha wide receiver 1, Nico Collins, is back in this offense. But on the other hand, I do think Nico Collins' return actually increases the value of targets Tank Dell sees. Sure, is he going to see, 9 to 10 targets on a week-to-week basis with Collins on the field? Probably not. But if he's getting an efficient 6 to 8 targets being used down the field, this was the same thesis we had coming into the year. We expected, Nico Collins would be the one based off draft position, and we were comfortable taking Tank Dell in the top 4 rounds. The only difference is that there's no Stephon Diggs on the field now. So with Tank Dell, again, I have him at 27. You can argue that's a little bit low. I do want to see at least one more week. However, I do think with both him and Nico Collins, they will establish themselves as a clear-cut, concentrated target hierarchy moving forward as the Texans offense improves with their alpha back on the field. And then at 28, we have Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons. I already talked about the game environment concerns that I have for Denver when I talked about London, but I do think Darnell Mooney on most weeks profiles as a week-to-week wide receiver 2. He gets downgraded a little bit because of the matchup, but I still really trust Darnell Mooney. The downfield usage, the consistent target share, he has established himself as a clear-cut fantasy option in this Falcons offense, and in fact has been a top 15 wide receiver on a point-per-game basis. Moving on to wide receivers 29 and 30, I already talked about 3 wide receivers from this game environment, but then we moved to Jackson Smith-Njigba and Ricky Pearsall. The aforementioned Seattle taking on San Francisco and Santa Clara this week. And I'll start off with JSN because he has been elite in the 2 games without DK Metcalf. But when you look at his on-off splits with DK on the field, it paints a different story. In weeks 1 to 7 with DK on the field, he averaged 10.8 PPR points per game and only a 21% target share. In the 2 games without DK Metcalf, 24.9 PPR points per game, 33% target share. That was one of the big reasons why I cited him as the sell high on our trade targets video. However, again, this is still a good game environment. We still want to be targeting a game environment with a 49.5 over under, with the sharps hammering the over like I mentioned, but I do have some concerns if people expect the last couple weeks of JSN. I don't think that guy comes out with DK Metcalf on the field. On the other end with Ricky Pearsall, first-round pedigree, has looked good anytime he's been on the field. And while he is the 3rd of the wide receivers I like from San Francisco, there's a very real possibility he establishes himself over Jawan Jennings moving forward. I think I would put that at about a 40% chance with how good Jennings has looked. I already talked about Jennings at 20, but I do think both him and Pearsall profile rather similarly. And then moving on to the flex plays, and a guy that is a big faller this week that I want so badly to rank higher, but I simply can't because of a multitude of reasons. We have Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. The reason why I can't rank him higher, 16.75 implied Jaguars points this week. Nearly 14-point implied underdogs. Chest injury he's been dealing with. Has not looked like the same player in these last few weeks. Now you're on top telling me that Trevor Lawrence is possibly out for the year. until he shows he can get back to that wide receiver 2 level. Again, I am not denying the talent. I think Brian Thomas can be Nico Collins Jr. That is the type of trajectory that I would expect him to go on moving forward in his career, moving into year 2. But with no Lawrence on the field in this overall offensive environment in Jacksonville at this current point, it's hard to trust him in your lineup. Again, I have him ranked here because I still trust the talent. But if he goes out there and has another week looking like he did in these last few, unfortunately, I will have to raise some of these options after him ahead of him moving forward. And speaking of, I mean, we can just go straight to 32, a guy that people are probably already starting over Brian Thomas Jr. Jacoby Myers has been an absolute revelation, and I will group both him and Jalen Waddle in this section right now. Obviously, big-time matchup. Raiders traveling on the road to play Miami. We do have an 18.5 implied total for the Raiders in this game, a 25.5 implied total for the Dolphins. And we will start off with Jacoby Myers because he is the usage play of this duo. With Jacoby Myers, he's received great usage since Devontae Adams has been out of the lineup. Since week 4, when, Adams was dealing with those hamstring injuries, we have seen 14.7 PPR points per game and the wide receiver 16 in that stretch from Jacoby Myers. And I think he has the opportunity, like I said, to continue climbing. I think he can follow a similar trajectory like we've seen from Darnell Mooney. Now I consider as high as I do, I think Jacoby Myers can follow that if we see a couple more very good performances. And in fact, I mean, if we just go through it, since week 4, 42% target share, 26% target share, 24% target share, and a 37% target share in those games. I think at this point, if he does have another good game, we can consider him a top 25 weekly play. Whereas on the flip side, it's almost the exact opposite thesis for Jalen Waddle, where he hasn't played well, he hasn't looked good, he hasn't been involved in this offense, but I'm trusting the overall infrastructure to fix suit. Tua's going into his 4th game since returning from concussion. Tyreek Hill, as we know, with that wrist injury, is banged up. And I just trust the process here. I trust this offense to get back on track. I think Jalen Waddle is too talented of a player. I do understand if you have another option, like, for example, Demario Douglas or maybe another guy I don't mention on this video, that you want to sit Jalen Waddle for. I understand. He hasn't played well. However, for me, given the implied total, given the offensive environment, I am still trusting Jalen Waddle as a fringe top 36 play. At 33, we have Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills, 24 implied Bills points hosting the Chiefs this week. And Amari Cooper did say, like I said, he thinks he will play on Sunday, but I think for the time being, based off how Khalil Shakir has played, we need to be treating Shakir as their wide receiver 1. He's been consistent in that slot role, and while Casey is very good against opposing wide receivers, I think Khalil Shakir is insulated based off 2 factors. Josh Allen, 24 implied point offense. I understand that the matchup as a whole is tough, but when we're looking at Khalil Shakir, in games he has played over 60% of the snaps, he has scored double-digit points in each and every one of them. So while the overall matchup does limit him to wide receiver 33, I think he's one of the safest flex plays in fantasy football. 34 is DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears, and man, like, we could talk about his weekly involvement. We could talk about, his target share, his air yard share. We could talk about how the Bears offense is going to bounce back on a week-to-week basis. The point remains, the Bears offense has struggled mightily. DJ Moore is not playing the same football we've been accustomed to seeing from him. And this is not the production we can expect from a week-to-week startable option. Top of that, he's been under 10 PPR points in each of his last 4 games. And the vibes right now are completely out in Chicago. I mean, who knows? Maybe Thomas Brown comes in, fixes the offense. We can start to see some good performances moving forward. But when you also combine the fact that Green Bay's been very stingy against wide receivers, I don't think that comes this week. I think maybe next week, maybe the week after. But against Green Bay, it's hard for me to see a change at OC completely flip in the direction of this offense. And then closing us at 35, we have Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts, 19.75 implied Colts points on the road against the Jets this week. And with the recent announcement of Average playing on top of a difficult game environment going up against New York, I downgraded Josh Downs big time. Again, I still have faith in him. I think he's a very good player, very involved in this offense. But 2 factors with Average in this game environment make it hard for me to rank him over the other options on this list. He's been incredibly consistent this year. If you have Josh Downs, he's more than likely going to enter your flex. But I am very concerned for this game environment, and I do think it's one of the lower range of outcome games for Josh Downs this year. But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. Like I mentioned, if you want access to all of our rankings moving forward, there's one of 2 ways to access them right now. First way, Underdog Fantasy. If you guys use promo code FSC, sign up and first deposit at least $10. You make 1 play on the site, you will get access to our weekly rankings each and every week moving moving forward. The other way is flockfantasy.com. Promo code FFC, 30% off of any site-wide package, as well as a 7-day free trial on the site. Those are the two ways to get the single best resource in fantasy football. But with that being said, peace out. Good luck in your matchups. Leave those start-sit questions below.